Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. And as we catch up with our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States, to his usual Mission Impossible theme, I find myself asking the question, will I ever give him Mission Impossible? I've come to the conclusion that in the short to medium term, the answer to that question is no. How do we find you this morning, sir?
Well, you know, when we started this, I promised to give you all the information from this side of the big billabong, warts and all, and I think I've finally grown a wart.
Well, I was going to say, after 25 episodes, you're either mad or it's one of those things that you actually quite enjoy doing.
A little of both. Thank you.
Well, listen, it doesn't hurt to be mad sometimes. In fact, mad is good. Sometimes it pays to be a bit that way. Now, something that actually, interestingly enough, we were talking last week with a couple of people on the program because we had a talkback caller named David who, interestingly, was talking about whether or not governments of various different persuasions were even interested in whether or not people really were green and were interested in taking up green things. One of the great polluters, of course, is the humble motor car, but environmental concerns have really sort of changed the way we look at motor cars, and we kind of imagine that across your side of the pond that has come into even sharper focus because fairly or unfairly, and I must say I think fairly, you Americans have a reputation for loving those big hulking great V8 gas guzzlers.
Although you don't see much of those anymore, there are more of the six-cylinder or newer, more efficient four-cylinder cars, but you're absolutely correct. There doesn't seem to be much of a push to get any more greener than what we're used to, and that equates directly to the U.S. auto emission standards. Granted, they're far better now than they were decades ago. All the new domestic and foreign-built vehicles have to meet federal standards here. Older models, you have to meet state emission standards in order to pass a yearly inspection, and you need to get your car inspected every year in order for you to register at the licensing bureau, which happens every year. If you can't pass that state inspection, you don't get your car re-registered. So it's in everyone's best interest here to have their cars running as efficiently as possible.
Look, so something we have here in Australia is we have a fuel consumption label. And if you ever walk into a car yard in Australia, one of the things that you will always see, it's on the left-hand side of the car. I guess if it was the same thing was being displayed in the US, it would be on the right-hand side of the car. But in the car yard, every vehicle has to have one of these, every new vehicle, that shows the fuel consumption, that is the combined test, which is a combination of both urban and what they call extra-urban driving. And then you have urban and extra-urban as an individual result, and the CO2 emissions. And, of course, the information is done through a thing called Australian Design Rule 8102, which is basically sets out the testing rules to get this. But every new vehicle in a yard must display the fuel consumption label.
It doesn't matter how much fuel your car consumes as long as the fuel that it's consuming is not spewing out excess amounts of carbon emissions. So that's why the state inspections are as stringent as they are. The state inspections cover everything from brakes to windshields to wiper blades to lights and so on.
In other words, they're a basic roadworthiness inspection.
Exactly. Top of the list of that, though, is your fuel emission. Make sure your exhaust system is up to snuff. That having been said, for many years, the country has tried to have an emissions standard, and through various administrations, the auto emission and miles per gallon standard has been less than consistent. The auto industry lobbyists have been very effective in delaying and reducing proposed standards under the excuses of retooling cost, remaining competitive with foreign automakers, although most of the foreign automakers have had factories here for generations, low consumer demand, and the fact that as long as gasoline is under $3 a gallon, what's the problem? So there really hasn't been all that much of a push for truly green cars and fuel-efficient cars until recently.
If I could just interrupt you there, Richard.
Sure.
When you said it was only until recently there hadn't been any great push for greener cars or lower fuel consumption cars, was that because people in your country, you believe, have now started to become more environmentally conscious, or has the recent spikes that we saw certainly a couple of years ago in the price of petrol, when even the price in the United States went to levels that you people had never seen before, was that what pushed people towards greener cars, or was it the fact that you also think that people genuinely started to get some sort of environmental conscience?
I think a little of both, But again, it goes back to as long as everything is fine, as long as everything is affordable. We have very short memories here. We had $4 and $5 a gallon gasoline not all that long ago, and now that it's under $3 a gallon for 87% octane, nobody cares whether or not they're getting 20 miles to a gallon in their cars or 35 miles to a gallon. So it's really going to take a real wake-up call for this country to come around. We had somewhat of a culture shock back in the 70s when we had the oil embargo. Lines a mile long to get gasoline, and everybody started jumping. Well, a lot of people jumped on the diesel craze. I know that Volkswagen had a lot of models that were diesel. Now diesel isn't any cheaper than regular gas. It's still dirty. Not all gas stations carry it. The upside is that diesel engines will burn just about anything, including fast food, cooking oils, and kitchen grease. The downside is try to find a steady supply of cooking oils and kitchen grease, and you have to filter it and store it. Now, as I was about to say, President Obama has introduced another part of this multi-tier national fuel economy proposal. This latest proposal is calling for, and I'm quoting a bit here, passenger cars, light-duty trucks, and medium-duty passenger vehicles covering model years 2012 through 2016, requiring that these vehicles to meet an estimated combined average emissions level equivalent to 35.5 miles per gallon. That is the latest national proposal, which has taken a page from California's own state emissions policy, which is the toughest in the country. In addition to that, there's also one for heavy-duty trucks, which also cause 20% of the greenhouse pollution here in the United States, and most of these tractor-trailers are only getting 6.1 miles per gallon.
Gee, it amazes me that anyone can afford to run them, and I suppose the reason why California has always had the toughest emission laws is because per capita they have about the highest concentration of car ownership in the world, don't they?
Absolutely. Los Angeles being one of the most smog-polluted cities in the country. You also see Detroit, New York, Atlanta, even coastal Portland, Maine, and Boston during the summertime will have emissions problems as well. So it is an issue that we really need to deal with.
Are they really getting on top of those sort of issues, do you think? And also, what are the political implications of what they try to do? I mean, when you start to talk about reducing these emissions, I'm kind of figuring that one of the things that they're most sensitive about in the United States at the moment is the peril of the big three, General Motors, Ford and Chrysler. Of those three, only Ford didn't take a handout from the government to keep itself afloat. So you kind of sort of realise that whereas, well, other companies and certainly some of the Japanese and European car makers who you've already identified have got plants in the US have done pretty well, the GFC damn nearly wiped out, save and except for the help from the government, damn nearly wiped out what are American icons in terms of cars. Has that really said a lot about the fact that the big three in America really haven't had their eye on the ball, whereas the Japanese and European car makers have, and that's something that may well come again? So if they don't plan for the future properly and don't get greener and don't have more cleaner operating cars and more economical cars, that perhaps long-term the future for the US car industry is not good.
Well, that was part of the stipulation, and any time you run the risk of when you accept government money is that there's always strings attached, and the automakers that did take the government bailout money, and they are paying it back, the string attached was, we'll give you the money, we'll get you back on track, we'll save all these hundreds of thousands of jobs, but you need to change your business model. You cannot go back and do business as usual by producing these gas-guzzling cars. And we're seeing all of these major companies making an effort. They all offer hybrid models. Not all of them, very few of them are offering strictly straight all-electric models. The Chevy Volt is one, the much ballyhooed Chevy Volt that's going to be introduced, I believe, in September. That is purely electric, and I think that's the only electric car that the U.S. automakers are making at this point. Already it's having some controversy because in the pre-order, some California dealers are doing price gouging, so you can expect to pay anywhere from $36,000 to $61,000 for this all-electric car, which still doesn't have a proven track record like the hybrid, the gas and electric hybrid that Prius has had for over 10 years here. So I think that it's a good thing that those companies that did take the money, the onus is on them and the responsibility is on them to start changing not only their business model, but also producing cars that the general public wants and that is good for the environment.
How much resistance is there to this from the public? Because I still kind of get the impression that many Americans, they like what we consider the old gas-guzzling cars, what we over this side of the pond used to call the Yank tanks, and I think it's fair to say that still a lot of people have a soft spot for the Yank tanks, and it's probably fair to say that there are plenty of Yanks who still have a soft spot for their beloved Yank tanks.
It's cyclical. You'll see a popular car like a big gas guzzler like the Cadillac Escalade, which is an SUV on steroids. It's very glitzy. The celeb rappers drive it. The Kardashian sisters and all these nobodies are driving these things. I'm seeing fewer of those and more of still the SUVs where the soccer moms drive, but they're also with hybrid technology. Now, Toyota has several models, SUV models, that they use the Prius technology in. I'm seeing Ford pickups that have hybrid technology. As long as it doesn't impede the performance, hybrid technology is something that's kind of like we're using the term natural food in the pet food industry, where it's not as regulated as the human industry. The same thing applies to the cars. That something that is alternate fuel may just mean that you can use a higher percentage of ethanol. Hybrid may mean something completely different than a car that's truly hybrid. So they're making an effort. I think that 90% of it has to do with marking green technology, but at least there's an effort made, and because of all the cars that are available out there, the many dealers and many brands that are here, that the general public does have an option of going green and not necessarily paying a premium for it, because as we have just seen with the necessity of the bailout, the auto industry is very competitive, and no one is going to pledge allegiance to any of the big three when they can buy a foreign label like a Toyota or Honda or even a Kia or Hyundai here in the country that was made here in this country, made by American workers. I think the cost-conscious consumer has a lot to choose from, and I think we'll be seeing people going in that direction very shortly.
Now, what we would term foreign car makers, that you obviously have been talking about, that have plants in the United States, which car makers have plants in the United States? Straight away I'm thinking that Toyota inevitably do, because they do here.
Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen has had plants here for many years, BMW, Mercedes, Volvo, you name it, they're all here. And some of these companies are actually owned by the big three anyway. There is a lot to choose from. And it was funny, too, is when you see a recall, whether it's a major or a minor recall, you'll see several models, maybe up to 5 models from 3 different manufacturers, and they're all using the same parts.
Proving the old theory that one size really does fit all.
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to mention, it's no longer, or it has never been, a conspiracy between the automakers with the internal combustion engine and the people who make gasoline. It's never been a conspiracy. It's a marriage. It's a collaborative effort. And all you need to do is just look at your owner's manual if you have a late model car, and I guarantee you'll see brand names in there of what oil to buy, what gasoline to use. You look at the tires, you go to any car dealership, and they're all by the same company that are in bed with the car manufacturers. That's just the nature of the beast.
Well, you've got to understand there are some people who just like the conspiracy theory, mate. And all you're doing now is being an absolute killjoy by saying, well, you know, there isn't really a conspiracy. There is just a thing called commercial dependability.
I love a good conspiracy as well as the next person, but, you know, there's conspiracy and there's truth. So let's get rid of the truth. Let's get that out of the way, and then we can focus on the conspiracy.
Oh, look, there's a lot more fun in a conspiracy.
I'm for that, sure. Yeah.
It sounds much better to believe that the left wing, the right wing, the KGB, the CIA, the Moonies, the Freemasons, and the Fabian Society have all combined to join in with petrol companies to exploit us over the use of motor cars. I mean, that's much more fun than what you're saying, mate.
Well, sorry to be a killjoy.
Hey, listen.
That's the way I am.
When you have a look at the cars that are fuel efficient, I'm taking and I was just about to ask you, according to US figures, what's the most fuel efficient car? Is it the Toyota Prius?
Toyota Prius is top of the list. It's a top seller. It's very fuel efficient. Now, again, this is a gas-electric combo hybrid. It's been on the market for a number of years, probably the oldest hybrid that's been out there. Nissan has just begun an aggressive ad campaign for their new all-electric Leaf, which is being pitched by Lance Armstrong, of all people.
Hold the bus. We've just got to clear something up. Before you go any further, Richard meant Nissan. Carry on.
As I mentioned, the Chevy Volt should be out in September. High miles per gallon in popular cars. Mini Cooper, when Mini a few years back made a resurgence here in the United States, everybody jumped on those Mini Coopers thinking that they were going to be fuel efficient. They were high performance. But since, I'd say the past 6 years, Mini has been really increasing their gas mileage, but not compromising on performance. Mini is going to be introducing an all-electric car soon. Daimler's Smart Car, the little two-seaters that I saw in France some years ago, finally made it over here. I don't see many of those, and I think...
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, bearing in mind the fact that that, let's face it, America has been born off the back of very, very big cars. I can't imagine those really compact European cars are going to take off. You see a few of them around here, and they've certainly been here for a few years, but they're just not taking off, and I think that it's probably because even though we haven't got the big car syndrome to quite the extent that you have, we certainly have it. I think that a lot of people just can't get their head around going quite that small.
I do see a few of them, and I think that why we don't see too many of them in New England is because we have such harsh winters. And when you've got wheels the size of bagels, we get snow drifts here 6 feet deep. A car that's got about 6 to 8 inches ground clearance isn't really going to do well. I do see a few of those in the summertime here and in the cities. The Scion is a very popular car. Ford's Focus is very popular and selling quite well. But still no real major push for all electric, no solar, and no hydrogen-powered vehicles yet. I think a lot of that has to do with where you're going to get the fuel from.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's always interesting. I know at one stage I read, I think it was on General Motors' website, where they suggested that within 10 years they would be producing just about every model in hydrogen. I think it was fair to say that was an ambitious, ideal aim that probably wasn't necessarily practically what was going to happen. It was, this is what we intend to do, but it wasn't really going to happen.
The only time I see anything really happening here on a grand scale, and this is unfortunately, or good, bad, or indifferent, this is what our country is about, our democracy, is that unless there's a mandated government-ordered ban on all internal combustion-powered automobiles, and then supported by the same government-ordered and supplied switch to alternative energy-powered vehicles, we're just going to be putting gas in our tanks for years to come, hopefully a lot less, but we're still going to be using the internal combustion engine, which is not to say that technology doesn't exist or cannot exist very shortly. It's just not at my dealer yet.
I get the point. Hey, thanks very much for that, Richard. Don't forget, if you'd like to be Richard's friend on Facebook, Richard S. Kazimer. Kazimer, by the way, is spelled Kazimer. Richard S. Kazimer is where you'll find him on Facebook, and he's always going to be happy to be your friend. In the meantime, always a pleasure. We shall have a chat again next week.
All right, brother. Drive safely.